A crisis within a crisis. That's what aid workers have called the 7.8 and 7.5 magnitude earthquakes that rocked large pieces of Turkey and Syria on February the 6th. The scope of the tragedy has been overwhelming, though occasionally punctured by miraculous scenes like this one.
17-year-old Muhammad Anas Yanar and his 21-year-old brother Abdul Baki were pulled from under a collapsed 8-story building in Kahramanmaraş. On the 198th hour, they stayed alive by eating protein powder.
And in a cruel twist of fate, 2 weeks later, an additional 6.4 magnitude shock sent traumatized survivors in Turkey's Hatay province, one of the hardest hit areas, on February 6th, fleeing their homes once again for the safety of rubble-strewn streets. As of this recording in March, the death toll in Turkey and Syria has passed 50,000 people. The United Nations estimates that as many as 5.3 million people in Syria alone may have lost their homes, though it will be months before we know the true scope of the devastation. The disaster is compounded by multiple crises in the region and the complicated relationships the country's leaders, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad and Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan, have with the rest of the world. First, there's the Syrian civil war, a conflict that's killed hundreds of thousands of people, displaced millions, and decimated northern Syria, where the earthquakes struck. Almost all of the area's 4.5 million residents are dependent on humanitarian assistance to survive. Then there's the refugee crisis. In 2010, before the war, Turkey had 10,000 refugees. Today it has more than 3.6 million from Syria alone, many living in squalid camps that are already dealing with a cholera outbreak and freezing temperatures. Then there's financial turmoil unfolding in both countries. Syria's stems from over a decade of civil war and Western sanctions. But Turkey's economic meltdown is of its own making. The government's policy of lowering interest rates is creating runaway inflation. Its currency, the lira, is collapsing, and the majority of Turks struggle to afford food and housing. President Erdoğan is also navigating a very complicated political environment ahead of the general election in May. He's trying to avoid the pitfalls of his predecessor, who was booted from office 2 decades ago, in large part because of his mismanagement of an earlier quake that killed over 17,000 people. What matters most now, of course, is expanding the flow of aid to the people in Turkey and Syria who so desperately need it. But how much is leadership standing in the way, and how to ensure that the help continues to flow long after the news crews go home?